Imagine you are a farmer. You have never bought a bag of fertilizer in your life. You have never installed an irrigation system, never tested your soil pH, never read a gardening book, and never worried about nutrient deficiencies. You have no greenhouse, no drip lines, no raised beds with imported soil mix. And yet, every single year, your farm produces enough food to feed your family and probably your neighbors too, in one of the hottest, driest climates on Earth. How? You did not do anything. The river did it for you. This is not a fantasy. This is not ancient mythology dressed up as agriculture. This is what Egyptian farmers actually experienced for roughly 4,000 years, and it contains a lesson so simple and so directly applicable to modern gardening that once you understand it, you will look at your raised beds very differently. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The most reliable farm reset in human history. Every year, without fail, the Nile flooded its banks. It happened like clockwork, driven by monsoon rains thousands of miles away in the Ethiopian highlands. The water rose, spread across the floodplain, and deposited something extraordinary as it moved. A layer of fine, mineral-rich silt, carried all the way from the mountains of Central Africa, ground down by thousands of miles of river movement into the most fertile planting material on Earth. When the floodwaters retreated, usually sometime in October, they left behind a fresh layer of silt approximately 3 to 4 inches deep across the entire floodplain. Egyptian farmers called this layer the gift of the Nile. Modern soil scientists, if they are being honest, would call it the most efficient fertility system ever operated at agricultural scale. That silt contained everything a plant could possibly want: silica for cellular strength, iron for chlorophyll production, calcium for root development, potassium for fruit and seed formation, plus dozens of trace minerals that had been physically ground out of ancient mountain rock by thousands of miles of river current, then delivered directly to the surface of the soil in a form that plant roots could access almost immediately. Egyptian farmers planted directly into this fresh silt layer. They did not till, they did not amend, they did not wait. They simply pushed seeds into the moist, mineral-rich surface and let the soil do what that soil was built to do. A full season of wheat, barley, lentils, onions, leeks, and vegetables grew. It was harvested. And then the farmer waited for the Nile to do the whole thing again. For 4,000 years, automatically, for free. The part nobody talks about. Here is what makes this story more than just interesting history. That silt layer was not magic. It was not some mystical property unique to the Nile that can never be replicated anywhere else. It was minerals, specific, identifiable minerals, physically ground from rock, deposited on soil, and made available to plants. And every single one of those minerals is available to you right now at your local garden center for about $15 a bag. This is the part of Egyptian agriculture that historians gloss over because it sounds too mundane. We prefer the dramatic images of pyramids and pharaohs, but the actual agricultural secret of ancient Egypt was not the Nile itself, it was what the Nile was carrying. And once you understand what it was carrying and why it worked, you can replicate the essential chemistry of that annual silt deposit in your own garden bed in about 20 minutes at the beginning of each growing season. What Nile silt actually was. The Nile travels roughly 4,000 miles from its source to the Mediterranean Sea. Along the way, it picks up material from some of the oldest and most mineral-dense geological formations on Earth: the volcanic highlands of Ethiopia, the ancient granite of the Sudanese plateau, the compressed sedimentary layers of the Upper Nile Basin. As water moves over rock for thousands of miles, it does something that normally takes geological timescales. It grinds rock into fine particles. Those particles are not dirt in the way we typically think of it. They are raw mineral material in a physical state that plant roots can actually interact with. Silica, the most abundant mineral in that silt, is what gives plants structural integrity. It is why a healthy wheat stalk stands upright in wind while a nutrient-depleted one collapses. Iron drives chlorophyll production, which is why iron-deficient plants turn pale and yellow. Calcium supports root cell walls and helps plants uptake other nutrients. Potassium regulates water movement inside the plant, which becomes critically important the moment we start talking about heat and drought. These are not exotic compounds. They are the basic mineral vocabulary of plant biology. The Nile was delivering them in a perfectly prepared form, year after year, directly to the root zone. Modern gardeners attempting to maintain soil fertility typically address these needs through synthetic fertilizers that are heavy on nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium and almost entirely ignore the broader spectrum of trace minerals that the Nile was supplying automatically. That gap is exactly why soil in a synthetic fertilizer garden tends to slowly decline in productivity over time, while the ancient Egyptian floodplain remained extraordinary for 4 millennia. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The modern translation: mineral top dressing. Here is the technique. At the beginning of each growing season, before you plant anything, you apply a 2-inch layer of mineral-rich material across the surface of your garden bed. You do not dig it in, you do not till it under, you lay it on the surface, exactly the way the Nile laid its silt, and you let rain and root activity and soil organisms work it down naturally over the growing season. This is called mineral top dressing. It is not a complicated technique, it is not an expensive one, but it is a direct functional translation of what Egyptian farmers experienced every year for 4,000 years. The material you are applying is a mixture of 3 things, each one targeting a specific component of what made Nile silt productive. The first is rock dust, sometimes sold as rock flour or glacial rock dust at garden centers, typically around $15 for a substantial bag. This is literally ground-up rock, containing the same broad-spectrum mineral profile that the river ground out of mountain geology and delivered to the Nile Delta. Silica, calcium, iron, magnesium, and dozens of trace elements that synthetic fertilizers do not include. Apply it generously. It breaks down slowly, feeding the soil for the entire season and partially into the next. The second component is wood ash from any fire, a fireplace, a fire pit, a wood stove. Wood ash is remarkably mineral-rich, particularly in potassium and calcium. It also slightly raises soil pH, which becomes useful in high rainfall climates where soil tends to acidify over time. A light dusting across your bed, maybe ½ an inch, mixed into your top dressing layer, adds the potassium component that made Nile silt so effective at supporting fruit and grain production. The third component is aged compost, not fresh compost, aged and dark and finished, about an inch worth. This is not strictly a mineral amendment, it is the biological component that activates the minerals, providing the microbial activity that converts raw mineral material into forms plant roots can actually absorb. Coarse sand mixed into this layer, if your soil has drainage problems, completes the physical texture that allowed Nile silt to both retain moisture and avoid waterlogging. 2 inches total, applied at the start of the season, left on the surface, and planted directly into. That is the technique. 4,000 years old, $15 in materials, 20 minutes of work. The second half of the Egyptian system, mineral fertility, was only part of what made Egyptian agriculture function in extreme heat. The other part was water management, and it was equally clever. Egyptian farmers did not irrigate the way we do. They did not run water continuously across the surface of their fields, watching most of it evaporate in the desert heat before it could penetrate the soil. Instead, they built shallow earthen walls around their planting beds. Small, low ridges of packed soil forming a shallow basin shape around each plot. When irrigation water was applied, it pooled inside that basin. It could not run off. It sat on the surface, and it slowly penetrated downward to root depth the way floodwater naturally behaves when it has nowhere to drain. The soil absorbed it fully rather than losing most of it to surface evaporation and runoff. Modern researchers who have studied this technique have measured its effect and arrived at a number that should get the attention of anyone gardening through a drought. Basin irrigation reduces water use by approximately 60% compared to standard surface irrigation, while delivering more of that water to the actual root zone where plants can access it. For modern gardeners, this technique requires almost nothing to replicate. A raised bed already has sides, a slight rim of soil around a ground-level bed. 2 or 3 inches high costs nothing and takes 10 minutes to build. When you water, you fill the basin slowly and let it drain down. You do not water again until the soil at root depth is actually dry, not until the surface looks dry, which in hot climates happens within hours. The combination of the mineral top dressing and the basin irrigation technique is what allows this system to function specifically in heat and limited water conditions. The mineral layer improves the soil's physical structure so it holds water more effectively. The basin technique ensures that the water you do apply goes where it needs to go rather than evaporating off the surface in afternoon heat. Why this matters right now. If you are gardening in California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Nevada, or anywhere in the American Southwest, you already know the problem. Water restrictions are tightening, summer temperatures are climbing. The gardening advice written for moderate climates with reliable rainfall simply does not apply to where you live. You are, in a very real sense, in the same situation Egyptian farmers were in. Hot, dry, working with limited water, trying to grow food anyway. The Egyptian solution was not to fight those conditions. It was not to import water from somewhere else or build elaborate mechanical systems to compensate for the climate. It was to understand exactly what the soil needed, supply those specific things efficiently, and manage water with a precision that made every drop count. Rock dust from the garden center, wood ash from your fire pit, aged compost, a slight rim of soil around your planting bed. That is the whole system, the same system that fed one of the greatest civilizations in human history for 4,000 years in the heat. The Nile does not run through your backyard, but the lesson it was teaching for 4 millennia is still completely available to you. The river's gift was never really the water. It was the minerals the water carried and the slow, patient delivery of exactly what soil needs to sustain life year after year without burning out. Your garden bed is waiting for the same thing, and unlike an Egyptian farmer, you do not have to wait for the flood. You can just go buy the rock dust. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.